Hello and what is up, YouTube? My name is G3 Iron, and today we are taking a look at a hardcore build update, as well as maybe a little bit of a build guide, a smidgen of a build guide, I guess, if you want to follow along and maybe use this as inspiration for your own build. You are, of course, welcome to do so. This is not an original concept. This is not something that no one else on the planet has ever done. In fact, some of you already looking over my gear can probably identify some of the different choices that I'm making and the type of build we're playing. So without further ado, you can of course give us a like, a subscribe, and hit the bell for more videos just like this one. Let's take a look at this Spark Inquisitor that we are playing in Hardcore Synthesis League. So those of you that are wondering what league I'm in, this league, Hardcore Synthesis League. I think I've announced this a gazillion times over the last couple of weeks. Yes, I'm playing Hardcore all league this league. So even when we rip a character, it doesn't matter. We're still going to be playing Hardcore. This guy has originally started out as a rebound character from when I lost my witch in Act 3 to Freezing Pulse guys. I wasn't running a Freezing Flask at the time, and simply died to a pack of dudes on the way to Dominus that froze me, and down I went on the witch. So this guy was originally a rebound character that, as you can tell from the name, I had originally intended to be a Hierophant. Because I've got a couple of goals this year in Path of Exile. One of them is to accumulate a mirror in Standard, which means I'm going to be playing a bunch of different leagues and trading and making a bunch of currency, and then hopefully purchasing a mirror either in a league or in Standard, whichever is more efficient. And then the second goal for myself this year in Path of Exile is to have at least one character in Standard from each Ascendancy that's at least level 80. So that way I can play around in Sandbox with different builds whenever we get passive tree updates and try different things out. I love to do that. And if you have a character with every single Ascendancy, you don't have to rerun the lab whenever you want to try a different build out. So that's the goal for me this year, and I originally was intending for this guy to be a Hierophant because I don't have one over on Standard, and some things changed. So I looked at the passive tree, I looked at the nodes in Hierophant, and I simply just wasn't convinced with how good it was going to be. I looked at it and thought, this is simply inferior to Inquisitor, both with its damage and what it can pump out, as well as its defenses and what it can do now that Inquisitor has gotten, and Consecrated Ground has gotten, so many different changes. I really think there's a lot going on with Inquisitor, and I'm seeing, actually, I'm trading right now with an Inquisitor here in Hardcore League. I really think there's a lot of benefits to playing Inquisitor right now, even in Hardcore League. So oftentimes when playing a Hardcore character, you want to go as defensive as possible, and that's generally speaking what I try to do. That being said, this guy did the opposite. I looked at Hierophant and simply saw, okay, there's some nice energy shield and mana interactions that are going over there. But if I'm going to go, mind over matter, that's great, and that'll help me against CI. But I really wanted to be able to jam in acrobatics and or phase acrobatics into the build, because simply not getting hit, right, thinking .jpg is the best defense in Path of Exile, whether that's through block or simply through high dodge chance. So I really wanted to make sure that I could fit in some way acrobatics as well as phase acrobatics as a defensive mechanic, and with the potential to be able to go CI if I wanted to. And for Hierophant, it really doesn't make sense to go CI. Just overall, it feels like it's conflicting interests to go CI. And so one of the things that I made sure I did early on in the process of deciding an Ascendancy was simply to look around for different builds for both Hierophant as well as for Inquisitor, and then make a decision based on what was out there, what was available, what potentially got buffed and changed in 3.6. And so while I did originally want to go with a Hierophant and go Stormbrand, I leveled with that for a while through Act 3. I've already played an Armageddon Brander and Elementalist last league, and just didn't feel like Brands was going to be the way for me to play at the moment, starting out in Hardcore Synthesis. So that is an incredibly truncated way to introduce this build, which is a Spark Inquisitor farming like a god with the video guide attached from Bashtart. So thanks so much, Bashtart, for putting this together. Bashtart's guide pretty much hits all of my different qualifications for what makes a good guide. It looks like it's fun. It's got video evidence. It's got a path of building. It's got a leveling section. It tells you exactly how much things are going to cost and how to upgrade your character progress as you continue to scale with your own currency and with your own progress throughout the league. And so really enjoyed this particular guide, and of course it is linked down below in the video description. So those of you that are wondering what is it that are the pros and the cons of playing a Spark Inquisitor? Well, a couple of different things. Top tier clear speed is one of them. Spark has historically, throughout the lifetime of Path of Exile, since it's been out, been an incredibly strong skill, and Vol Spark in particular is just absolutely ridiculous for clear speed. And so when starting out in a league, you really, especially when in hardcore, you really just want to stay alive and you want to accumulate as much currency as you can. I'm not interested necessarily in pushing for endgame bosses right now, because I do play a lot of Path of Exile either while I'm at work and I'm between work or between work phone calls. So I want something that is safe, that is fast, and that isn't necessarily mechanically intensive for me to have to mash around a bunch of buttons and pay a huge amount of attention to, you know, a boss fight, or potentially even to just be able to ditch a boss fight if I get a work phone call. So that's all very, very important for me. So top tier clear speed and high DPS are actually very, very high on my list of needs right now as a player. And so while I'm playing hardcore, that may sound stupid to go with a high DPS fast boy, but that is nonetheless what I've chosen. Now, it's very safe for mapping because of the various layers of defenses that exist in this particular build. We'll talk about that more in just a second. It's viable for level 100. This is all geared towards a softcore character. There's actually an FAQ section of Bashtart's guide that addresses hardcore. We'll get to that in a minute. It's easy, fast, and fun to play. It really is all of those things. Realistically, I don't even have my threshold jewels equipped yet because I'm simply going greedy for all sorts of crit as well as life. So I'm casting in just a single direction, but it really is just pressing one button and away you go. There go all your sparks. It's one button, and then a second button is simply to shield charge, which is going to proc fortify for you. And if you get clipped on any particular, let's say, object, then you can always flame dash away if you're in trouble. So if you get caught on a strong box, if you get caught on a object that you didn't see, you simply smash your flame dash in the opposite direction and get out of there ASAP. So the defensive layers and the defensive mechanics of being very fast and very quick and not having to mash a whole bunch of buttons is great. The downsides of it are that it can't face tank everything, and that is a no duh. It's an Inquisitor. It is not a Jug, and no regen maps can be quite annoying. There is quite a bit of regen that you are dependent on this particular build as a defensive mechanic, because you're not necessarily leeching a whole bunch, as well as the reality that Consecrated Ground is a massive defensive and offensive boost for this particular build. And so if you're not able to regen, then all of that regen just goes out the window from Consecrated Ground. So I'm going to really quickly show off the build mechanics. The offense, as Bashtart says, is based around Inevitable Judgment, which crits ignore enemy resistances, and the best way to scale the damage is with crit at chance and multiplier, spell damage, and elemental damage. Different sources of conversion are used to deal with Spark and Blade Vortex, mainly elemental damage, lightning, and cold. The defenses are layered on many parts. The first line of defense is the cold damage of Spark, which freezes most trash mobs before they can even hit us. If mobs don't get frozen and they try to hit us, we use many mechanics to avoid the damage: evasion, dodge, and block. If those layers fail and we do get hit, we use different sources of damage mitigation to avoid one-shots. We use the Inquisitor Ascendancy for crazy life sustain with regeneration, life on hit, and a bit of leech. Here's all of his gear. This is his endgame gear, which as soon as I looked at his endgame gear, my first reaction was, okay, I'm not going to play this build because it wants a 6-link Impulsas. I'm playing hardcore. That's going to be like all of the currency that I can generate in the first few days and then some. And it's all going to end up in standard anyway at some point. So that was a big turnoff to me until I looked at budget gear for under 10 chaos. And most of this stuff was true in hardcore, not just in softcore, but this was all really budget stuff. And as you can see on my character, we've got most of it ready. So let's go over the build particular items that are required in slots. So first off, we've got Singularity. This is a great scepter because it gives you increased elemental damage. It also adds flat lightning damage to spells. It's got cast speed, which is important for both Flame Dash as well as for Spark. It's got 7% reduced mana cost of skills, which is great because we're reserving so much of our mana. So any sort of cheap way that we can save mana on cast is beneficial. Nearby enemies are also hindered with 25% reduced movement speed. That's fantastic because we're using Shield Charge to proc Fortify. It's great because it means that we're going to be close to enemies. We don't want them moving that fast. We want to be able to see their action speed and what it is that they're doing. We don't want them to run away or chase us if we need to get away. And then you've got a percentage amount of increased damage with hits and ailments against hindered enemies. So when you get into the middle of a pack using Shield Charge, you're also doing a bunch of extra damage as you're casting your Spark. So that's Singularity. That's our budget weapon of choice. Then we've also got the 3 Dragons Golden Mask, which is a great way to convert a ton of your different elemental damage to do different fun things. So this is what 3 Dragons Golden Mask does, and I haven't played one of these builds for a while, and they are quite fun. So it gives you a bunch of flat elemental resistances, which is great. Then your fire damage can shock but not ignite. Your cold damage can ignite but not freeze or chill, and your lightning damage can freeze but not shock. Since we are scaling up on lightning and cold damage, we are going to both ignite as well as freeze, which is fantastic for damage over time, as well as defensive mechanic of just freezing everything on the screen so that way it doesn't come after you. In the shield slot, you've got Chernobog's Pillar. It's an ebony tower shield. This one, I don't even have enough currency right now to quality this up, simply because I've been too lazy to do so, but it's got just under 1,000 armor. It'll have 1,000 armor once I quality it. Gives you a bunch of flat life on its implicit as well as built into the item. It then adds fire damage to spells and attacks. It gives you flat fire resistance, and then gives you 25% of physical damage converted to fire damage, and 25% chance to curse non-cursed enemies with Enfeeble on hit, which is fantastic because it means that anything that didn't get cursed, anything that isn't nearby and become hindered, like let's say for instance you wanted to run an additional curse, maybe that's conductivity or frostbite, right? And maybe you want to run that on blasphemy because you're just paranoid, right? That's fantastic. But then anything that's outside of your blasphemy range, or that's outside of your close range for blasphemy or for self-cursing, self-casting cursing, means that all of that stuff gets enfeebled, because you're hitting it with all of your various sparks, because spark actually hits. So it's really, really nice. Just a well-rounded defensive shield, again, because we are in hardcore. If I was playing this in softcore, this would be a spell increased shield slot that would just give me a bunch of spell damage, or even a second weapon that just gives a bunch of elemental damage and spell damage. In our amulet spot, we've just got a rare with a bunch of flat life. The rest of the rare is really, really junk. It's simply there for the flat life. It also gives me some flat stats on strength and dexterity, as well as some increased lightning damage. Our rings are also rares and junk. This is just a diamond ring that's giving me some crit chance as well as some life. And this is an amethyst flask, which is giving me some needed chaos resistance, as well as some life and some generic resistances. In the chest slot, I went with Ambu's Charge, the Crusader's Chainmail. This gives a bunch of flat life. It gives a bunch of all resistance, which is great. Between just Ambu's Charge and the 3 dragons, I'm getting 45 all resistance, which is huge if you're going to play a build that requires a lot of different uniques, or takes advantage of a lot of different uniques. Then I gain an endurance charge when I take a critical strike, which is really nice. Anything that actually does get through all of my layers of freeze defense, block defense, dodge defense, etc., anything that actually does crit me gives me an endurance charge, so it's nice for the next hit that I take. And then 2% of life is regenerated per second if you've been hit recently. So that's another reason why the regen is really, really nice to have around. In our glove slot, we've got Khaleesi's Grace, the Samite gloves. Socketed gems are supported by level 18 faster casting, so this is a pseudo 5-link for me early on in the league. It gives flat energy shield, it gives maximum life, and then you gain 2% to critical strike chance for 2 seconds after spending a total of 800 mana, which I occasionally proc. Realistically, farming Blood Aqueducts right now, I don't really proc it that much because everything dies before I spend 800 mana, but when I need it, it's nice to have as a bonus. In the belt slot, this is just a really generic belt that gives me some needed strength and dexterity, as well as some flat life. And then in the boots slot, I'm using the Windscream, which gives, again, the theme of the build and the unique so far: flat all elemental resistances, move speed, increased elemental damage, and I get to apply an additional curse, which is fantastic. All right, so in the flask slots, we've simply got a mana flask that removes freezes and chills. We've got 3 different life flasks because I'm paranoid. I've got a divine life flask of grounding, so removes shock. We've got an experimenter's diamond flask of iron skin, which gives me increased armor. And then, of course, my critical strike chance is lucky. I pretty much mash that all day. Then we've got the Saturated Colossal Life Flask, which gives me 1500 life over 10 seconds, which is really nice. It's essentially an extended or an elongated version of life regeneration. And then I've got the Seething Sanctified Life Flask of Staunching, which removes bleeding, and then I get 496 back instantly, which is really nice. Once I actually take a hit, or once I see that I'm bleeding and it goes past my energy shield, I just simply pop the Seething Sanctified Life Flask and restore that life right away, which you can see. Speaking of life, I've got 4,400 life, 600 energy shield, so not a whole bunch of energy shield. I'm not dumping any item slots really into that. I'm not prioritizing it on the tree necessarily. It's just extra that's nice to have there. And then the life is at 4.4k. I'd like to get it up to 5k, but we'll see how realistic that is on budget and gear. So, jumping back over to the build guide, he's got a couple of FAQs that he does deal with on Bashtart's guide. So first off, he uses Blood Rage. I'm not to that point yet, but I'm going to hopefully get there. He says, when we activate Blood Rage, a physical debuff is applied to us. When we get hit, cast 1 damage, procs Immortal Call, and we will activate the Arakali Pantheon of 50% increased recovery of life and energy shield if you've stopped taking damage over time recently, which is a crazy boost to our life regen and leech. The life gain is not shown on your tooltip, but you should feel it in action. That is a fantastic mechanic. I am looking forward to playing around with it as an added defensive layer. How do you get that chilling effect when killing an enemy? Why does your sparks look like spiders in his video? Herald of Gloom MTX, and then the Shatter effect and Spark Spider effect MTX. Is this build viable for hardcore? The build is balanced for softcore, but it has really good layered defenses, so I think that with much more investment in defense, it can also be played in hardcore. When should I take Mind over Matter, which I've already done because I'm greedy and I leveled with MOM. MOM is a very powerful, but without very good mana gain mechanics, is also a very dangerous keystone. Without sufficient mana gain, it can happen that when you receive a big hit and stand there without any mana left. So I would recommend only speccing into MOM when you have either Pious Path or percent of damage taken gained as mana over time, i.e. the Battle Rouse. Where can I use the Hazardous Research Threshold Jewels? The required intelligence does not have to be allocated. It just needs to be in the radius of the jewel. How do I link my gear? There you go. And what's the best roll for Watcher's Eye? It's going to be crit, lightning damage, and fizz to lightning. So there you go. Once again, this is all linked down below. He's also got a POB, which is linked down below in the video for your benefit. Lastly, I wanted to take a look at this Hazardous Research before showing you what the passive tree looks like. Hazardous Research is the threshold jewel for Spark. It gives you increased lightning damage, and then with at least 40 intelligence in radius, Spark fires projectiles in a Nova. I wanted to highlight this because he has to address it in the FAQ, Bashtart does, or Bashtart, because a lot of folks don't understand that passives don't need to be allocated for many of these threshold jewels to take place. So it just says with at least 40 intelligence in the radius. So when you're looking at the passive tree and you see right here, here's a jewel slot, and in this jewel slot there are going to be plenty of different intelligence nodes, and they don't necessarily all have to be tagged in order for there to be 40 intelligence grabbed. Another example of this is actually over here in this jewel slot, which grabs a bunch of intelligence nodes. Even if you don't have all of the intelligence nodes tagged, which essentially saves you passive points, you can go and grab the Hazardous Research jewel, and it will be in effect because it simply has 40 intelligence in the radius, not 40 intelligence allocated in the radius. So that's an important wording distinction. The second line is that with at least 40 intelligence in radius, Spark fires 2 additional projectiles, and it gives 20 to 15% reduced spark duration. So on the one hand, you might look at that and go, oh, well, Spark is a duration skill and it bounces. It's really great to have added duration. Yes, it is, but if you can fire 2 more projectiles and fire them in a Nova, that's fantastic. It means you essentially don't have to aim your skill, that you can simply drive off your gameplay in a particular straight line, and all of the damage of Spark will simply go around you. So taking a look, transitioning at the passive tree, this is what my passive tree looks like right now. It's a little bit different from Bashtart's because again, I am going very, very greedy, whereas he did not. I came all the way down over here to grab Devotion because there's a bunch more life, and it's very close to our starting location. So this was actually one of the very first things that I did for damage as well as for defenses, was grab Devotion as well as Holy Dominion. You get a bunch more all elemental resistances as well as 5% chance to freeze, shock, and ignite. Then I came up and grabbed Mind Over Matter over here, and I did grab the additional maximum mana and increased mana. Again, right now I'm pretty much rolling with all of my mana capped. I might spec out of Mind Over Matter at some point. I might not. I'm not sure yet if those points are going to be better used elsewhere or if I'm simply going to unreserve, but right now I'm feeling pretty strong. Quick recovery is great for maximum life, mana regen, and life regen per second. Then I actually came all the way up here to Cruel Preparation, which gives me some all elemental resistances and a bunch more life. Here's a 5% nodes on either side. Came over and grabbed Annihilation, which gives more crit, which is fantastic. Sorry, increased crit. I always forget that the word more is is a particular keyword in Path of Exile. Came over, grabbed Deep Wisdom, and then I started picking up some lightning damage with Near Nimbleness, as well as, Doomcast. Came over and grabbed a bunch of crit chance and crit multiplier. Then I grabbed some more life with Melding. I, of course, grabbed Written in Blood on the way to Doomcast. And right now I am over here on Blood Drinker. And I'm over and far and away from Acrobatics. How many points am I still away? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm still 6 points away from Acrobatics. So right now I am level 71. If I just wanted to no life level it, even before I got to Kitava, then I'd be at, 77 before I got Acrobatics. I am definitely going to progress through the story. So there's lots of different options that you've got on the passive tree about how you want to path this. This is one of the things that I liked about Bashtart's particular guide. He's actually got everything in images as well as in the path of building, prioritizing different sections of the tree to go towards. I'm a little bit different in how I decided to approach it. Again, I'm coming from a hardcore greedy perspective, so I wanted to go life but then also grab damage secondarily, whereas I think if I was playing this softcore, I think I would have just gone full on damage and crit and then maybe grabbed life as needed. Another big difference, I think, between our two builds is going to be in the Ascendancy. So he says to grab Sanctuary as well as Pious Path first, because you're going to have all of these added effects of your consecrated ground. And that's probably a very wise decision, but I was, again, greedy, and I'm really surprised this guy is still alive. Maybe he's going to rip, and maybe you'll see an update over the next several days that this guy dies. But I went Righteous Providence first, so that way I had the increased critical strike buff chance. I don't think I'm going to grab Inevitable Judgment next. I think I'm going to save that for Uber Lab. But I might. It depends on how greedy I'm feeling, because Sanctuary and then Pious Path are probably the much more safe and worthwhile nodes. But we'll see how greedy I get once if I kill Izaro and actually get to touch that platform and ascend 2 more times. So that's the build guide. What's next for me? And what's next in the plans for hardcore Hierophant Draconis? He's the Hierophant in disguise, wearing the Inquisitor stuff, the Inquisitor gear. What's next for me is to ascend twice to kill Kitava and then to get on to maps. So hopefully this was helpful to you. If you do enjoy this style of video, let me know down below. I typically don't focus on build guides as a style, because I think there are so many other content creators that do a great job with it. So often I just don't feel like it's a very worthy experience for our particular community. That being said, I have gotten numerous requests from many of you to show off a build guide and to show off what it is that I'm playing. This is what I'm playing in hardcore. So if you want to play it in softcore, go for it. If you're looking to try a hardcore experience, I would start off with this guy leveling with Stormbrand, because you can get that at level 12 and you don't need all of this other stuff, and level as far as you can either with Stormbrand or Divine Ire, because both of those are fantastic. Divine Ire and Wave of Conviction was great, and it carried me all the way up, I want to say, until like level 55 or 60 when I swapped over to Spark. Anyway, thanks so much for watching, and I hope that today is the day a Mirror of Calandra drops for you in Synthesis League.